That fifth round, obviously when he dropped you and he got on top of you, there were a lot of punches that looked like they were blows to the back of the head. A lot of your fellow fighters were criticizing the referee online over him not stepping in and either warning Mike or stopping Mike from the blows. I'm curious, when it was happening to you, were you shocked that the referee didn't, stop what was happening?
I'm not here to criticize, but I'm gonna tell you something. There were a lot of blows to the back of the head, a lot of fence grabbing. There was also some eye pokes, and I was telling him what was going on. I kept calling for his attention, and nothing would happen. I would hope that he would intervene, but nothing happens.
All right, so the rematch between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler took place this past Saturday at UFC 309, and I thought it was a really fun fight to watch, but even a couple of days later, my biggest takeaway from the match is that Michael Chandler is actually a bit of a dirty fighter. This guy seriously committed so many blatant fouls throughout the 25-minute fight, and I will be taking you through every single foul that I was able to spot in this video. I'll also be talking about how Mike fought dirty against Dustin Poirier in his fight just before this one afterwards, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Right off the bat, at 4:35 on the clock, in the very first round, Chandler scrapes at Oliveira's eye while Charles is throwing a right hand, and immediately after, you can see him start rubbing his right eye. Then about a minute later, while trying to defend a takedown, Mike clearly grabs onto the top of the octagon in order to prevent being brought down to the ground. John Anik and DC both mention on the commentary that this was a blatant foul from Chandler.
Chandler grabbed the cage. Watch his leg.
Chandler, yes, got away with a blatant grab there on the top of the fence.
At 2:23 on the clock, you can definitely see Chandler transition from wrist control into hooking Charles's left glove, and immediately you see Oliveira try and pull his arm back to try and get Mike's fingers out of there. Much like most of the fouls throughout this fight, this went unnoticed by Keith Peterson, but rest assured this is not the last time that we're going to see Chandler hook the gloves in this video. Then about a minute later, while Mike is stuck on the bottom, he straight up grabs the fence with all 5 fingers right in front of Keith Peterson, who then tells him to knock it off. Alright, call me crazy, but starting with 40 seconds left on the clock, I feel like Chandler started throwing some punches from the bottom position where a couple of them hit Oliveira on the back of the head. And then with 30 seconds left in the round, you can clearly see Mike latch onto the cage with one of his fingers, and then he immediately starts grabbing the fence with a couple more of his fingers. He straight up latches onto the fence for 7 seconds before the ref notices, and even after Keith Peterson tells him to let go of the cage, Mike still hangs on for a couple of more seconds until Peterson moves towards him to swat his hand away. Okay, so in 5 minutes of fighting, I counted at minimum 5 different fouls, and even more if you agree with me that some of those punches from Chandler landed to the back of the head. Regardless, Chandler got away with grabbing the cage 3 times in this one round, and Peterson didn't even give him a hard warning. Okay, so 40 seconds into round 2, after Chandler slips and falls after getting hit, he grabs onto the cage to help him back up to his feet. You might not think that this is all that significant because this wasn't a grappling exchange, and even though I don't think that this affected the fight all that much, this did in fact help Michael escape a bad position, so I do think that this should have been called by the referee. Alright, in the third round, Michael grabs the fence for an egregious amount of time in order to avoid being taken down to the ground again. We only start to get a glimpse of him clutching onto the fence at 3:06 on the clock, and he doesn't let go until 3:01. But based on his arm positioning before the camera cuts over to him holding the cage, I think it's very safe to assume that he was holding onto it for several seconds longer than what we actually see. Regardless, we straight up see the guy latching onto the cage for dear life for 5 full seconds while he's defending a takedown. This is a really bad foul. You can even hear DC comment on how Mike is illegally holding onto the cage while he's doing it too.
Chandler's holding onto the fence.
Then starting at 2:20 on the clock, you can clearly see Mike slip his fingers into Oliveira's left glove. Immediately, Oliveira repositions his head to confirm that Chandler is hooking his glove because he could obviously tell that something wasn't right, and then you could see Charles look up at the ref to see if he's actually going to do anything about it. Once Michael recognizes that Charles is complaining about the foul, he immediately stops hooking into the glove, and then Oliveira starts looking up at Peterson again to continue complaining about his gloves being hooked. However, just based on the positioning of their hands and the camera angle, we unfortunately don't get a clear view of what's going on. It's not until 2:02 on the clock that we can then see that Chandler is definitely wrapping his fingers on the inside of Charles's right glove as well. So literally in the span of 20 seconds, we have video confirmation of Michael hooking into both of Oliveira's gloves while his back is taken by one of the best grapplers in the history of the sport. This is some pretty egregious stuff out of Mike, and the fact that he tried to get away with a double glove hook for as long as he did is absolute insanity to me. And then once his gloves are finally free, 3, Charles transitions into throwing elbows to the top of Chandler's head, who then starts complaining to the ref about the strikes, but these types of elbows are completely legal. Do you guys see the irony here? This dude who has been committing fouls throughout every round of this fight has the audacity to complain about elbows that have always been allowed in the UFC. This is some genius stuff out of Chandler here. Alright, so round 4 wasn't all that bad in terms of fouls from Mike, but I still feel like at 2:13 on the clock, you can see Chandler wrapping his toes into the fence for leverage. At one point, you can actually see his toes gripping into the fence in order to prevent a transition from Oliveira, and then they relax again once the transition is stopped, so I'm pretty positive that this was in fact a cage grab out of Mike. I'm not totally sure on this next one, but I feel like Michael might be wrapping his fingers in Oliveira's gloves again for the final 20 seconds of this round. It kinda just looks like he repositioned his fingers into the gloves, but it's really too hard to tell, and even if he did, Oliveira didn't protest it, seeing as he just wanted to ride out the rest of the round in this position. Okay, so round 5 is where I think the most famous and recognizable sequence from this fight comes from. After Chandler hurts Oliveira early into the round, Charles ends up in the bottom position. From here, Michael goes for the finish with some heavy ground and pound shots, but I swear, man, most of these punches hit squarely to the back of Oliveira's head. Now, the thing is here, Chandler's glove isn't really the point of impact in these shots. He's really striking Charles with his forearm, and even though in some of these strikes it looks like Chandler's glove is past the back of Oliveira's head, Chandler is definitely making impact with his forearm to the base of Charles' skull. Starting from 3:47 on the clock, Chandler threw 18 shots from this position, and I straight up counted 12 back of the head shots, and trust me, that's with me being forgiving with what my definition of what back of the head actually is. Like, some of these were clean shots for sure, but in my book, after rewatching this sequence 4 times at 0.25 speed, I definitely feel like more than half of these were illegal. You can even hear DC freaking out about these shots on the commentary, and even though I disagree with him that all of these shots were to the back of the head, there were more than enough to justify Keith Peterson stepping in and doing something about it.
Oh, behind the head! Behind the head! Big shots from He's behind the head! Ropes! That's all behind the head.
Sometimes I do feel like us UFC fans exaggerate about back of the head shots, but in this case, yeah, these were pretty bad. And then moments later at 2:47 on the clock, Chandler can clearly be seen holding onto the fence in order to help maintain his top position and probably to prevent Charles from throwing up a submission. Obviously, there was a lot of shady stuff going on from Chandler's side to the point where Charles humbly addressed how many times he got fouled during the post-fight press conference. Like, even if you remove the back of the head strikes where people are going to disagree with how many actually landed, then you still have the guy committing eye pokes, hooking the gloves multiple times, and grabbing the cage way too many times that call his performance into question. And let's be real here, this is not the first time that one of Chandler's opponents have called him out for fighting dirty. In his previous fight against Dustin Poirier, Michael can be seen fish-hooking Poirier's mouth, and he can also be seen throwing a ton of back of the head shots in this fight as well. Look, I don't hate Michael Chandler by any means, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible in my analysis here. But in my objective opinion, this guy has had 2 extremely dirty fights in a row, and I absolutely think it's fair to put Chandler's competitive integrity into question after his past 2 performances. And it's like the fouls that he pulled on Poirier were pretty bad for sure, but he really turned the dial up to 11 in this fight against Oliveira and committed way more fouls than he did in his last UFC outing. Hey, the guy is a really fun fighter to watch, and I think that he's must-see TV every single time that he steps into the cage, but that doesn't excuse him for pulling out every single foul in the book in order to try and win, only to end up losing a lopsided decision. I'm not gonna sit here and say that he's a bad person because I really don't think that that's true, but at least for where we're at in his career, then I would agree with many fans that he is a little bit of a dirty fighter. Like, in one single fight, the guy committed more fouls than most fighters do throughout their entire careers. That is crazy. Anyways, that is the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about Chandler's performance at UFC 309. Do you think that he's a dirty fighter like I do, or do you think that this is all some big misunderstanding? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.